So my name is Carson Wilhite, and my presentation is on the Enigma machine. So the background of the Enigma machine. The Enigma machine was a cipher used by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. It was used extensively by all branches of the German military. It was used to protect communications and trade and diplomacy, as well as military communications. And it was eventually used mainly just in military communications. And it was such a secure cipher that it was used to encrypt the most top secret messages. The history of the Enigma machine. The Enigma machine was invented by German engineer Arthur Scherbius at the end of the First World War. It was initially marketed by the company Scherbius and Ritter. It was founded by Scherbius and his partner. The product began marketing under the brand name Enigma in 1923. And initially, Enigma was marketed commercially. Like when I said it was used for trade and diplomacy, it was mainly in the earlier models. And earlier models of the product were adopted for secure communications and private business. But because of the efficiency of the product, government and military elements became interested in its implementation. And as it was marketed in Germany, the Nazi German government and military eventually adopted it. There were multiple different versions of Enigma that were in use before World War II. Japan and Italy already implemented many versions of the product in the business sector and several in the military. In 1926, the Enigma product was adopted by both the German Air Force and its Navy. Also in 1926, Enigma became known almost exclusively in military circles in Germany. By this point, the business sector had phased it out mainly, and it was just bought in the military circle. The Enigma machine was perfect for use in military radio communications, not only because it was secure, but it was also compact and easily portable. The design of the Enigma. The Enigma machine is what is called a rotor machine, which is an electromechanical stream cipher device, rotating wheels. On these wheels is the keyboard, which displays symbols used in the encryption. And the more I read about this, the more it started making sense how the design was. In these earlier slides, I was still kind of trying to wrap my head around it. But anyways, the rotor is the wheel that has the keyboard, or wheel that has the letters, and keyboard is the keys that are pressed after the rotors are set. The electrical pathways, because the Enigma machine was powered by electricity. Electrical pathway carries an electrical current. The Enigma machine manipulated these currents to scramble the message. The mechanical parts of the machine produced an electrical circuit which caused the rotors to rotate. This is the keys, the circuits, into the rotors. The rotors, part of the design of a rotor machine, rotating wheels which hold the keyboards. In the case of the Enigma machine, there were 3 rotors and 3 different keyboards. Each keyboard was used to create a multiple layer system. Rotation of the rotors of the Enigma machine made so that it wasn't a simple substitute, meaning it wasn't just one to one. Each time a single letter was mapped, the entire coding system changed. Lamps. When a letter is pressed on the keyboard, the rotors rotate to produce the encoded letter. The encoded letter would then display on what is known as a lamp board. Key would be pressed and an encoded letter would light up. So, lamp board, the encrypted version of the letter, light. How Enigma encryption works. Starting from a simple substitution cipher, a word is encrypted from a one-to-one encryption. One letter takes the place of each plain text letter in the encrypted message. Simple substitution cipher, this right here, one-to-one. Adding rotors made the cipher system more complicated. By adding rotors, you could represent the cipher as two alphabets in alphabetical order. Since the Enigma machine used electrical wires to connect each pair of letters, which allows the possibility of how the substitution is mapped, which increases the possibility. So this one is how the Enigma rotors work. Particular initial position, first turn, second turn, third turn. So each time substitution cipher gets complicated and is more complex than the routines. And a rotating substitution. In a normal substitution cipher, if someone deduces that a certain letter is mapped to another letter, every instance of this letter could be decrypted. If A is mapped to G, every A would be a G. Using the rotating cipher, the Enigma machine was able to use a method to change the mapping of each letter. So not every G would be. Enigma was able to accomplish this by embedding all of its electrical wiring into rotor wheels. By turning the rotors while the letters remain stationary, the connection between the letters on adjacent keyboards changed. After one turn, A would no longer be mapped to G. By repeating this process, no consecutive letter in the encryption will ever be mapped to the same plaintext letter. The Enigma machine, every rotor contains wires connected to multiple contact points. This allows every rotor to work side by side. Internally, each rotor is wired differently, meaning each rotor contains its own unique cipher. The German Enigma used 3 rotors, but up to 8 rotors were used in other. So here's a full representation of the Enigma machine, keyboard, and the lamps and rotors. Number of possibilities. Given the letter A, how many possibilities does this have for 3 rotors? For the first rotor, there would be 26 possible mappings for the letter A. The second rotor, there would be 26 more possible. Then through the third, 26 more mappings. And this leaves us with 26 to the power 3 possible. And this is the possibilities with the rotors without the plug order. So 26 to the third power is 17,567. Each rotor in Enigma were wired differently and numbered with Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. The design meant that all 3 of the rotors could be manually operated before an encrypted message was sent and the machine still functioned properly. To add further to the encryption ability of Enigma, it didn't matter what position each rotor was manually turned before use. Later in the Second World War, more advanced adaptations of Enigma with up to 8 rotors have been developed and adopted by other branches of the German military. But even on the more advanced adaptations, only 3 rotors were typical. But by adding more rotors, it possibilities, as there were more than 3 rotors that implementation. For an army message, you would have the choice out of 5 rotors because the German army Enigma had 5 rotors total. This means 5 choices for the left rotor, 4 choices for the middle rotor, and 3 choices for the right rotor. Because even though there were 5, it would just 5 times 3 times 4 is 60. That means there are 60 different patterns to choose. There are 60 patterns the rotors could take, and then the 17,567 possibilities, keys. So that times 60, total number is 1,054,560. That meant that there are 1,054,560 possibilities altogether with 3 rotors. And this is before implementing a plug board. So while older versions of the Enigma machine operated using only rotors, in 1930, German Army models were also equipped with a plug board. This was a series of electrical outlets connected to the keyboard which allowed letters to be swapped. Instead of just the letters on the rotors, letters could be swapped using these connections. Given that there are 26 letters in the alphabet, up to 13 swaps could be performed in one encryption. Usually no more than 10 were done. And the math behind this operation is complex, but when the plug board is added, we're left with this equation. And I actually had to watch a video from Numberphile on YouTube to kind of understand what this meant. But anyways, 2 to the power 10 comes from the fact that there were 10 swaps that were used. 13 was really never used, it was just 10. But the equation was 26 factorial divided by 6 factorial times 10 factorial times 2 to the power 10. And that equates to this number. Then that times the total number of possibilities with the rotors meant that the rotors combined with the plug board meant that there were this many possibilities for one letter. And this is how the machine was designed with a plug board added and how it connected to the rest of the machine. This is really interesting. This was a famous message that was sent in World War II, the Donitz message, and it was sent from a high-ranking German admiral to Adolf Hitler. And the way that this is represented, I thought this was really interesting. I can actually get out of a slide. But this right here, when encrypted, would be represented as this. So it then had to be decrypted on the other side. This is really a lot to take in. How was Enigma cracked? What were the flaws in Enigma? There were very few flaws in the design of the Enigma machine. Any mistake in transmissions were almost always on the part of the operator, but even then the operators made few mistakes. The main design flaw the Enigma machine possessed was the reflector. And it's from this that everything else kind of unfolded. It was building on this that different groups were able to crack messages in the Enigma machine. So what was the reflector? Reflector is a component in a rotor cipher machine that sent electrical impulses that have reached it through the machine's rotors back through the same rotors in reverse order. The flaw in the reflector lies in the fact that it prevents the encryption of a single letter from ever being that letter itself. So A could never be A, G could never be G. And that is what is called self-reciprocal. Enigma was self-reciprocal. This flaw is what led to the Enigma machine. And there were multiple methods used to crack the Enigma machine, and they were all pretty complex. I could do an entire presentation on just different ways that different groups crack Enigma machine, but essentially every every method was built on this reflector. So an early effort to break the Enigma machine cipher took place in 1927 in Great Britain. So this was well before World War II. And it was during this year that Britain openly purchased a commercial Enigma. which is less complex than the military ones used by Germany. And a World War II veteran and leading British cryptographer Dilly Knox, who is pictured right here, worked on its decipherment, but only had message he generated himself to practice on. Also, due to the complexity of the German military Enigma machine, which implemented the plug boards, all efforts made by the British on this part proved unsuccessful. And so it was Poland that made the most groundbreaking efforts to crack Enigma machine, and everything was based on Poland's effort. The rest of the Allies' efforts were based on what the Poles had learned. During the 1920s, the Polish Cipher Bureau attempted to crack the Enigma cipher due to the threat Poland faced from the German military, but early attempts yielded no success. In 1929, the Bureau started inviting math students from the Poznan University in Poland to take classes on it. After this class was offered, some students began working with the Bureau part. In 1932, the then 27-year-old mathematician Marian Rejewski and two other accredited mathematics graduates from the Poznan University started working with the Polish Cipher Bureau. Rejewski made more progress than anyone and beginning by the end of 1932, spent several hours a day working to crack the cipher. And he basically, all efforts made to crack the cipher were all built on everything this guy did. If there's one person who could be credited with cracking Enigma, it would be. So this is a timeline because there's so much to say about each part of this that I could do an entire presentation on just this alone. Anyways, in 1932, Rejewski's characteristic methods, which built on the reflector flaw. There's a lot to say about each of these. Couldn't really put all this in one presentation, but this was the most early method. 1933 was the Polish grill method, and then in 1938 was the Polish bomba method. And each one of these are more and more efficient in how they cracked Enigma messages. Then in 1939, the Polish disclosure, in which the Poles met with members of the Allies, first the British and then the United States and also France and other allies. But in 1939, this was a big, a pivotal year because this is when the rest of the allies were given access to what the Poles had learned about the Enigma machine. And the British bomba was introduced that same year, which was a more complex version of how to, or a more efficient version of how to crack Enigma. And by 1940, the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe Enigma was finally cracked in 1940. And then in 1941, the German Army Enigma was finally. Then in 1942, the American bombers, which the British, what the British had learned from the Poles, British in turn gave to the Americans. And in 1942, the Americans had the most efficient way. And so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching.